Hello, BookTube, and welcome to your Daily Penguin. That's our daily crawl through my Penguin Classics library, what Hannah and Hannah's Books refers to as my March of the Penguins. I had originally planned to make the Penguin Wall just a part of my 2019 library tour, shelf by shelf, and do it like a normal library tour. Okay, we're on this shelf. We're going to do this shelf today. So in this 30 minutes, I'm going to pull this book out and show you that's what this one is. Then this one, that's what this one is. Then this one, that's what this one is. And I ran out of time. I always do. I always underestimate how bad a disruption December is going to be for any plans of mine. I ran out of time and didn't have time to do the Penguin Classics. If I'd done the Penguin Classics that way, I wouldn't have had time to finish the library tour before the end of the year. And then it occurred to me, well, you could do the Penguins separately in 2020. And then it occurred to me, all right, well, why you're not doing the Penguins are your favorite books. Why you're not doing them any justice to go through them that way. Instead, do it a book at a time and really make your viewers suffer. As the original Huguenots suffered, so shall the Donoghue suffer. So we've been doing that, and we are in the ancient world, probably for quite some time still. And yesterday in the ancient world, I made you suffer. Talk about making you suffer. Yesterday we went through Aristotle, the father of philosophy, the philosopher, the eminent one, as Dante and all of his cohorts say. And Aristotle is a root canal. He's not enjoyable to read. He's not enjoyable to study. He's not enjoyable to repeat. He's not enjoyable to haul out at a party. For those of you undergraduate men who think otherwise, allow me to disabuse you of that notion. No one wants you to talk about Aristotle, ever. But he is part of the Penguin Classics, and he would have been in a library tour, a shelf tour in the normal sense of the word. So we have to go through it. We have to take the good with the bad when it comes to the Penguin Wall. The larger background question of why I would have bad, that's a question for another day, right? There isn't really an excuse for me to have any penguins on that wall that I don't like. This is my library, not, the Taunton Library that has a duty to all of its readers. This library has a duty only to one reader, me. And I don't like Aristotle. I don't ever reread him for pleasure, and if I were to consult him for instance, if somebody were to do a new edition of the Politics or something like that, if somebody would have nothing better to do than to do a new edition of the Politics, or if somebody were to try and cobble together a historical novel about Aristotle, something like that, then I would probably read up on him if I were going to review that thing, but I wouldn't read up on him in English language Penguin Classic translations. I wouldn't do that at all. I would download the original, or go to a Loeb Classical Library and just read the original. So there's really no reason for me to have Penguin Classics that I don't like. But like with the normal library tour that we did last year, part of the Daily Penguins will be a lesson in what I am to keep and what I am not to keep. I'm expecting to clear off 2 whole shelves of Penguin Classics by the time this March of the Penguins is over. I'm expecting to clear off 2 whole shelves of Penguins that I do not want. Then I'll make room for penguins that I do want. God knows there are plenty of them that I want that I don't have. But when we were doing Aristotle, when we finished Aristotle, I promised you an entertaining writer for today's Daily Penguin. And I was looking at my shelves, of course. I don't need any inducement to go over and spend time just wandering around those shelves. And in the ancient world, I came across not only an entertaining writer, but one of the most entertaining writers, although it's going to take a bit of massaging to make that point. And this is the Roman poet Juvenal, who we don't know that. What's that you say? You're asking in unison, why, Steve, is that a Roman fresco? Yes, it is. We don't know as much about Juvenal as we'd probably like. He was probably born sometime in the mid-1st century, sometime around 54, 55, AD 54, 55. Came of age during the darkest period of that era, the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. May have been exiled by Domitian and recalled by either Nerva or Trajan. And was trained in the Roman courts. That much I don't think you need a questionable 10th century biography to tell you. It's pretty obvious from these poems that this person had extensive rhetorical training of the type that you would have only if you were aiming for a career in the Roman law courts. But we know him mainly for these poems. He did a series of satires in dactylic hexameter that are brilliant. just brilliant. They are once again, as I was talking about with Ovid, they are technically brilliant, but they are also the reason why they have been studied forever. The reason why Juvenal has so many had once upon a time so many devoted fans is not metrical brilliance. It's that these open a wide, clear window to what daily normal life was like in ancient Rome, the seedier side of ancient Rome, not the public readings, not the doings of emperors, but courtesans, street urchins, scabrous stuff, scandalous stuff, normal, everyday stuff. The remonstrances that would be made by the major domo at a rich person's house if a poorer guest tried to pocket good food, for instance. In one of these satires, such a major domo is Juvenal has him saying, "Hey, can't you tell from the color of the food which is yours to pocket and which isn't? You're pocketing the good stuff. Put it back and pocket the stuff that's going a little moldy. That's for you. That's for your kind. You don't take good people's food." And that shows you not only some of the attitudes, the social stratification of Rome, but also something that maybe we wouldn't know if it weren't for poets like Juvenal, which is that when you went to a big banquet like that, when you were a client, the Roman social organization was that if you were a bigwig, you had clients. Not in the American jurisprudential sense of you're a lawyer and you have clients, but rather they were your gang. They were your thugs. They were, in the American entertainment industry, they were your crew. They were your crew. I once went to a dinner in Hollywood with a Hollywood figure. He's not a household name. His name is Stephen Berg. He was an actor on a TV show and got some production deals on top of that, and then went on to produce some major stuff. He's a very, very talented producer, very talented finder of talent, finder of money, a synergizer, bring the right people together, make a project take off. Those kind of people are rare. It is rare to get someone who can make that happen, and he can. But he by the time I met him, I only met him briefly, but by the time I met him, he had very much bought in to the Hollywood idea of having a crew of just his flunkies. Basically, they are his flunkies. He pays them, but he also gives them handouts. And they get metaphorical handouts of his fame. They get to go where he goes, where they wouldn't be invited otherwise. And he had a crew of these people. One to handle the car, one to handle the food, one to take out the iPad and check on specifics. And plenty of other entertainment figures have such people, even to the point of having someone, a grown man, whose job it is to hold a parasol over your head so that you are protected from direct sunlight. A grown man with that as his job. And if you've seen the TV show Entourage, you'll know that all these people have insulting nicknames, all ending in Y, all diminutives. So Johnny, Freddie, Tommy, Little Fish, Fart Face, that sort of thing. And they might not like it. They might go home and beat their wives because they don't like those insulting nicknames, but they will laugh in the presence of their boss and think and pretend that they lap it up. Well, in the Roman world, there was a very close analogy. If you were a bigwig, if you were a praetor for that year, or a consul, for God's sake, you had clients, and you yourself were a client of a bigger fish, and your family could also be clients of a big fish. And what that entailed was, on the practical level, on the lower levels, what that entailed was that when you got up in the morning, your first call of the day was to your client. You would dress and shave and go through the dark in the pre-dawn light. You would go to your client's house, where all of his clients were, to your patron's house, where all of his clients were assembling. And you might get a little breakfast out of him, or you might get a loaf of bread, or a crust of bread, or a bit of wine, or something like that, and then you would troop off to wherever he was going. It was a sign of social distinction to walk through the forum, if you were a bigwig, with your clients, so that you were never alone. And echoes of that have been true in all societies. They definitely echo in the modern day, in present-day Washington, for instance, a thing that was wonderfully lampooned on The West Wing. In present-day Washington, it is considered something of a disgrace, if you are a senator or a congressman, to be seen eating alone. It's assumed that you don't have any clout if you're eating alone, that you're not making deals and talking to powerful people, movers and shakers at lunch. And that's what would happen in the course of a Roman day. And we wouldn't know as much about what that feels like if not for Juvenal. if not for these wonderful, wonderful Quicksilver poems. The only problem here is, say it with me now, translation. Juvenal has vexed translators for a long, long time because he uses names. He uses proper names. And they are either props who stand in for real people, or they are real people. And often they are real people. It's one of the things that makes it possible to even quasi-date this poet is that he talks about real people a lot. And one thing that translators have loved to do for centuries with this poet is transpose those real people for real people in their own world. So that in 19th century translations of Juvenal, you will get Fitzcarraldo and Fitzgerald and Johnson and Dryden as names cropping up in a Juvenal poem, when Juvenal obviously didn't use those names. And the translator's rationale is, well, Juvenal was talking about a Samuel Johnson-like figure. He was talking about a John Dryden-like figure. But the reader isn't going to know who those figures are. So I will transpose more currently known versions of those tropes and put them in the poem instead. Makes for an incredibly jarring reading experience, and it happens a lot in Juvenal. This is the Penguin Classic. This is translated by the great classicist Peter Green. He does the lines in as close to the original meter as possible. He's one of the only translators who can actually do that without having it just become a mess, just become an absolute mess. He elaborately notates everything. This is by far the best introduction to Juvenal that you will ever get. And he does not do the name substitution thing. Instead, he does the proper classicist thing, where he gives the original name, and then in the notes to that poem, tells you all about the original, tells you as much as you can know, tells you as much as you are ever going to need to know about that name in order to make it known to you. So when it comes to making your introduction to Juvenal, I would recommend this Penguin Classic, this Peter Green Penguin Classic. The only hesitation that you hear in my voice is that even with Peter Green doing his best, I have noticed a wide gap between the effect that Juvenal has in Latin and the effect that he has in English. In English, he comes off as a lot more staid, a lot more scholarly than he does in Latin. In Latin, you are getting a direct voice of a person who was just at a dinner party, who was just at a whorehouse, who was just in the street with someone yelling about something, and is now writing a very consciously unaffected poem about that experience. Juvenal suffers a little from classicitis. His translators will see him and they will know his long tradition, and they will know that he's from 2,000 years ago, and they will classic him up when they shouldn't. And when they don't have much call to do that by the Latin. The Latin is metrically brilliant, but it is not metrically formal. So Peter Green is a little guilty of that in this and in all of his other translations. In his Odyssey and Iliad, he actually creates in his notes a counterpoint to that formalism, where he dusts off the formality and talks about things informally. But I still do recommend this, and as you can tell from my comments on Juvenal's Latin, I'm also going to recommend something else, which also was in the Penguin line, and that is Juvenal in English. I don't know if this series is made anymore. We're going through quite a few of them, and this is a series that Penguin did where they give you the author, but in a wide selection of translations from over centuries, so that you can look at the same section of the same poem and see some of the variation that's possible in the hands of different poets. I strongly do recommend this volume, especially for someone like Juvenal. I strongly do recommend it if you can find a copy. But even without it, the Peter Green Penguin Classic of Juvenal is the best English language version of Juvenal, and that is in terms of not only translation but also explanatory notes that you could ever hope to get. So it is a huge recommendation, and I hope a palate cleanser from Aristotle. Aristotle never wrote an interesting word in 50 years of writing, and Juvenal never wrote a boring one. So, so there you have it, and almost as long a career. God knows how much Juvenal we don't have, but he was probably still alive well into the 2nd century, 120, AD 120, AD 130 even. So it's possible that he wrote a huge amount more than the 16 satires that we have here. But this will do for a start. This will do for a start. So I would say start with that if you're new to Juvenal. You're gonna love him it takes a little bit of getting used to, and you want to, the best thing you could possibly do when reading, for instance, the slightly stuffy translations like Peter Green, and there were, Rolf Humphreys did one, Hubert Creekmore did one for Signet, or Mentor Classics, I think, about 60 years ago. That was everywhere. It was taught in every school in the world. It was an unexpected hit. And it's true there as well as it is here. An approach to a slightly stuffy English language translation of Juvenal would be to, when you're reading it, picture these things being said on stage by someone like Lewis Black, and you'll be fine. And you'll be fine. So there you go. That is your Daily Penguin for today. One of my favorite authors. This is Juvenal. We have the 16 Satires by Peter Green, and also, if you can find it, Penguin Classics used to do a Juvenal in English that will really help you a lot with this poet. And there you go. So we've balanced Aristotle, and we will move on. And I won't ask again. Last Friday I asked, should I pause the Daily Penguin for the weekend? I was met with a hosanna of no's. Don't you dare. It's a Daily Penguin. You do a penguin every day. So I will. So we will reconvene tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.